You won't hear any screaming in this story. But it's even more terrifying. Emma, 12 years old, was sent to live with her grandfather in the countryside after her father suddenly disappeared. People said her father was in debt. Her stepmother threatened her. She had to live with her 60-year-old grandfather. And what happened to her? Please listen to today's story. Listen to the whole story. I'm sure you will be very surprised. The bus stopped in front of the old gas station, which had just one gas station, a rickety sign, and a lonely wooden bench under the awning. A little girl with a messy brown hair got out of the car, dragging a moss-colored suitcase with peeling paint. She didn't look around, didn't wave to anyone. She just walked toward the man standing silently in the corner of the gas station. His eyes seemed to pierce through the gaps in the early summer sunlight. "She's here," Mr. Walters said softly, as if confirming something rather than greeting. Emma didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hands clutching the straps of her backpack. Her old baseball cap tilted askew, covering half her face. She looked like a kite that had lost its tail in the wind, no direction, no desire to fly. The drive to Mr. Walters' house was dusty and full of cactus. His old pickup truck drove slowly, the engine sputtering like an old man gasping for breath. Emma sat in the passenger seat, saying nothing, her eyes glued to the window. The wind blew through her hair, carrying with it the heavy silence in the car. "Are you hungry?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. Emma shook her head. Another question almost came out, but Walter swallowed it. It had been years since he had lived with children, and he had never learned to ask questions about someone who had just emerged from a world he did not understand. Walter's cabin was at the end of a small dirt road. It was surrounded by empty fields and a few rows of barren trees. The old dog, Buck, barked a few times, then stopped, realizing that his master had brought no stranger with him, just a silent shadow like the wind. Emma stepped into the house. The smell of old wood, dust, and silent memories lingered. The living room contained only a worn sofa, a bookshelf, a wall clock, and a single framed photograph, her mother, as a young woman, standing next to Walter when he was still a healthy, less wrinkled man. "Your room is upstairs, your mother's room," he said, pointing up the stairs. Emma nodded, then dragged her suitcase upstairs. Her steps were light, as if she didn't want anyone to hear. That evening, dinner was a silent affair. Mashed potatoes and fried eggs. Walter was no cook, but he tried. Emma ate only a few spoonfuls, then excused herself. When she turned away, Walter caught a faint bruise under her sleeve. He didn't ask, not because he didn't see it, but because he wasn't ready to hear the answer. At night, Walter sat on the porch, a mug of hot tea in his hand, staring into the darkness. Upstairs, Emma's light had long since gone out. But then he heard, very faintly, a stifled sob. Not a cry, but the sound of a child learning not to cry. Walter clenched his hands around his teacup. Something in him throbbed, not pity, but something akin to helplessness. The next morning, Emma woke early. She sat on the steps, doodling in a small notebook. Walter stood behind her, watching quietly. The paper was a picture of a bird, but instead of flying, it sat in a cage. The door opened, but it didn't fly out. "That bird doesn't want to fly?" he asked. Emma shook her head slightly. "It doesn't know who's waiting for it outside." Walter didn't know how to respond, but he understood. It wasn't that the bird couldn't fly. It just didn't believe the sky was safe anymore. That afternoon, he went into the living room, looking for an old book, and accidentally found a crumpled letter stuffed under the sofa cushion. It was handwritten. The handwriting was feminine, scribbled, and harsh. "You are the only thing that dragged your father down. I don't want to see you in this house anymore. If you dare tell anyone, I swear you will have nowhere to go." Walter sat down heavily in his chair. His hands shook for the first time in years. Not because of anger, but because he had just understood what Emma had not said, the silence of a child pushed into a dark corner by words. That night, Walter knocked on his niece's door. "I won't ask you anything if you're not ready," he said, "but if one day you need someone to accompany you to find the answers, I'm ready." Emma looked at him. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened slightly, like a calm lake after a wind. She nodded slightly. then turned and went back into the room, leaving Walter standing there, for the first time, not feeling alone in the house. Summer in the countryside passed quietly like the wind whistling on the porch. The mornings were soft yellow sunshine. The afternoons were hot, and the nights were suddenly filled with rain showers. All were filled with silence. But not all silence was peaceful. Emma gradually got used to Walter's routine, waking up early, feeding the chickens, watering the plants, and reading old newspapers. She no longer cowered like the first day, but still kept her distance from everything, as if she were always ready to leave if anything went wrong. Walter was in no hurry. He understood that children like Emma did not need hasty hugs, but needed time, a lot of time, to believe that they would not be abandoned again. One rainy afternoon, Emma sat on the porch, looking out into the garden, twirling a pencil in her hand. In front of her was an unfinished drawing, a wooden house, an apple tree, and a man standing alone. Walter approached and sat down beside her. "Who is that person in the picture?" Emma didn't look up. "Someone who didn't know what to do to bring someone back." Walter was silent. He didn't ask any more. He knew that if he asked any further, he would be entering a realm of memory that wasn't ready to be named. The next day, while cleaning out the attic for some old blankets, Walter found a wooden box. Inside were mementos from his son's time there, Emma's father, graduation photos, a few handwritten letters, a cassette tape, and a broken watch. He handed the box to Emma. "Your father used to like to keep these things. Maybe you'd like to see them." Emma opened the box, her eyes landing on a photo of her father holding her as a child. She turned it over. There was a handwritten note. "When you smile, everything is worth living another day." There were no tears, but Emma held the photo tightly, sitting motionless for a long time. That evening, while Walter was making tea, he heard a slight rustling in the living room. Emma was furtively opening a desk drawer, as if searching for something. When she saw him, she was startled. "What are you looking for?" he asked softly. Emma bowed her head. "I thought maybe he had some letters from father." Walter nodded. "Yes, but there are none new. They're all old." She paused, then said softly, "I don't believe he went on a business trip. I think he was pushed away." Walter wasn't surprised. He had been waiting for this moment for Emma to speak up. "I heard my stepmother call me once, saying, 'The farther the better.' And then my father disappeared." The next morning, Emma didn't come down for breakfast. Walter went upstairs and knocked on the door. Inside, the girl sat on the floor, surrounded by paintings. All of them were silhouettes, faceless, nameless, sinking into the water, or standing with their backs to the viewer. Among the paintings, one was the strangest, a man in a hat, walking out of a burning house. Behind him was a woman in a red dress, smiling, but holding gasoline in her hand. Walter knelt down beside Emma. "Did you dream that?" Emma nodded, whispering, "I don't think it was a dream. I think I remember." Walter didn't sleep that night. He sat and wrote in his diary. "She doesn't remember in words. She remembers in pictures, in fear, but clearly. Someone pushed my boy to the edge of the cliff. And maybe, he jumped because he thought no one would hold him back." He closed the notebook. He looked up at the family photo on the shelf. "I can't wait." The next morning, Walter gathered a stack of old papers, the watch Emma's father had repaired, and an envelope containing the last letter he had received before his son disappeared. After breakfast, he called Emma over, put his hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to know what happened to your father?" Emma looked at him. No fear, no hesitation, just a firm nod. "Then we'll go find answers. But it will take money. And you'll have to go with me, far away." Emma replied, her voice calm. "I'm not afraid of going far. I'm afraid of staying without knowing the truth." That evening, Walter took a piece of paper and wrote briefly, "I'm selling the car, and the 2 cows. The last time I sold something for someone I loved, I didn't have time to say anything. This time I'll say it." He taped the piece of paper to the refrigerator. Then he looked out the window, where Emma lay on the porch, her chin in her hands, her eyes on the sky. In the dim light of the setting sun, Walter saw that her eyes, for the first time, were no longer trembling. There was only anticipation, and something like determination. The next morning, Walter went to the house of old Henry. his old friend at the village entrance, who was also a dealer in cattle and second-hand goods. "You want to sell the car?" Henry frowned, still wiping the window. Walter nodded. "And the 2 cows? Are you sure? That car, you said you'd leave it to Ben." "Ben, Walter's son, Emma's father." Walter looked out into the field. "He doesn't need the car. He needs to be found." That afternoon, the sound of 2 cows being led out of the barn startled Emma. She ran to the window and saw Walter signing the papers with old Henry. She was silent for a moment, then went down to the kitchen. "You sold everything?" Walter turned back, smiling. "Yes, sell the things you can't take with you. But keep the most important thing." Emma looked at him, understanding. She didn't ask what the most important thing was, because the answer was right in front of her. 2 days later, they set off. The new car, borrowed from Henry, wasn't as comfortable as the old one. But the engine was strong and long enough to go. Emma sat in the passenger seat, holding a small backpack, inside which were a sketchbook, a photo of her father, and the small tape recorder Walter had given her, in case you want to say something that no one else can hear. Walter drove. His eyes were straight ahead, but he was thinking about all the things he had never dared to say. "Ben, if you're still alive, let me see you again before it's too late." When they got to the city, the 2 of them rented a small room near the market. The room had only 1 bed, a rattling ceiling fan, and a window overlooking a dusty parking lot. Emma didn't complain. She opened her sketchbook, sat by the window, and drew the countryside they had just left. Walter went to buy some necessities. On the way back, he stopped to look at a large sign hanging in the center. Jensen Group, reaching out to the world, keeping the faith. Jensen, Emma's stepmother's last name. That evening, Walter sat reading his son's old company profile. Financial news, business articles, event photos, full of glossy words. Emma watched from behind him, then quietly opened her laptop. She typed a few lines, finding a small blog, once owned by a former employee of the company. The old website still had a photo, her father, standing next to a tall man, the executive assistant she had seen in her album at home. Under the photo was a caption, "The man behind the fastest merger of the year." Emma pointed to the text. "This man was my father's best friend, but then replaced him as vice president." Walter nodded. "It seems like no one has ever climbed that high by accident." Emma began to organize the data. She taped notes to the wall of her dorm room. When did Dad disappear? Who signed the stock transfer contract? Why didn't the press mention the family details? She looked at the photo of her stepmother on the company website. Her eyes sharp. The woman wore a red suit. A perfect smile. Emma remembered her voice. "You're the reason your dad lost." She muttered, "No, not me." The next morning, Walter led Emma to the main office area, the place where her father's company used to be. They stood outside a tall glass building. After a long while, Walter asked, "Are you sure you want to go in there?" Emma tightened her grip on her backpack. "If they're not afraid of me, then I'll show them what they should be afraid of." Walter didn't stop her. He just said, "Remember what I said. If anything strange happens, press the red button on the recorder. I'll come in." Emma nodded, walking through the turnstile like someone who knew the place well. She sat in the waiting room, unnoticed. After 15 minutes, an employee led her to a small conference room, where her stepmother and the man in the photo, now the CEO, were talking. They saw Emma, laughed. "Oh, there's the little princess. Found her way?" Emma didn't answer. She put her backpack on the table. Still silent, the man laughed loudly. "You haven't changed. You're still the ignorant, untrustworthy, unneeded girl." Her stepmother added, "You're probably asking about your father again? He's gone, and you know what? We don't need to do anything. He lost on his own." Emma was silent. Her hand was in her pocket, pressing the red button lightly. After the meeting, Emma walked out of the building. The city wind was hot and dry, whipping her hair. Walter waited across the street. When he saw his granddaughter, he stood up and walked over. "Are you okay?" he asked. Emma didn't say anything right away. She just pulled her hand out of her pocket and held out the tape recorder. Her eyes were brighter than usual. "I don't need anyone to believe me. I just need them to tell me the truth." Walter chuckled. "And they did?" "Yes, and more." Emma turned on the tape recorder and listened to the entire conversation with Walter this morning. Her stepmother's voice rang out, cold, sharp as a knife. "He's not strong enough to fight us. When the contract was signed, he was nothing but a shadow." Then the lover's laughter. "It's a good thing he has this girl. Because of her, he's weaker. Afraid of scandal. Afraid of losing his child." Walter hung up. Silence stretched across the rented room. Emma sat by the bed, looking down. "So, it's you that he's afraid of?" she asked, her voice dry. Walter walked over and put his hand on her shoulder. "No, Emma, you're the only thing that makes him want to survive." The next day, Walter went to see an old friend, Mr. Griffith, a retired engineer for the Jensen Group. Griffith opened the door, surprised to see Walter and the brunette with him. "What happened to Ben?" he asked immediately. Walter sighed. "We're looking for answers, too." Griffith invited them in, made tea, and pulled out a box of old files. "I remember the day Ben disappeared. It was like something was wrong. But everyone kept quiet." He pulled out a faded contract. Turned to the last page, the signature. "This signature is different from the others. I did his paperwork before, the handwriting is different." Emma leaned in, examining each stroke of ink. "Is it a forgery? Can't say for sure, but it must have been forced. Or someone else signed it." Back in her room, Emma taped a new sheet of paper to the wall. On it she wrote, "The day Dad disappeared, after signing." She placed two photos side by side, one of her father sitting in the middle of a conference room, smiling, the other of her stepmother and the other man at a company party. Just 2 weeks later, a handwritten note in red pen read, "Too soon to be unprepared." That afternoon, Emma and Walter went to the coffee shop her father frequented. According to Griffith's diary, it was on the edge of town, called the Hollow Cup. The 30-something clerk paused for a moment when asked, "Mr. Ben? I remember him. He used to come here, order mint tea, and write in his notebook." Then he suddenly stopped coming. "When was the last time?" Emma asked. "About 7 months ago. I remember him because he left a little notebook behind. We kept it at the counter because no one claimed it." She pulled out a leather-bound notebook, less than 40 pages thick. Walter picked it up. The first page read, "If I ever disappear, believe me, not of my own free will." Walter and Emma returned to their room. They sat quietly all evening, reading each page. Emma's father's handwriting was slanted, sometimes shaky, some financial notes, some self-talk, confused and painful. The last page was hastily written. "I hear them talking about the border. It could be my end. If anyone reads this, tell her I'm not abandoning her. I just don't know how to hold her when I'm drowning." Emma burst into tears. For the first time since the journey began, she let tears fall. Walter said nothing. He just stroked her hair, slowly and gently, as he had done with his son. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, drawing a picture in her mind, a small house, a steel fence in the distance, a man with his head bowed, a notebook in his hand. The next morning, she showed the drawing to Walter. "You worked on the border, right?" Walter looked at the drawing, nodded. "This is the southern border, near El Paso. Do you think your father went there?" Walter wasn't sure, but he had a distinct feeling in his heart, the heartbeat of the truth about to come out. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I've been ready since the day you first believed in me." Walter drove along Highway 20 on the way to El Paso. Dry fields, rusty fences, and red dust covered the road. Emma was silent, holding her father's notebook, opening it line by line as if reading an unfulfilled promise. Walter thinks about his son, who was once so strong, who protected everyone, but did not know how to protect himself from poisonous words and loneliness. Now, Emma is looking for him. But in fact, she is also looking for the part of herself that was erased in that life. The night in El Paso was strangely quiet. The yellow street lights were dim like the eyes of a sleepwalker. In the small motel room where they stopped, Emma sat at the table, her sketchbook open before her, pencil in hand but not yet drawing anything. She looked up at her father's old notebook, reading the last paragraph over and over again. "If anyone reads this, tell her I didn't abandon her. I just didn't know how to hold her when I was drowning myself." Emma closed her eyes. Her breathing evened out. She wasn't searching for ideas, she was searching for a blurry image in her memory. The next morning, Emma gave the drawing to Walter. A small house with a tin roof. Outside a trellis of crimson bougainvillea. In the distance were low hills. A diner with a faded white wooden sign, El Camino Diner. "Where did you see this place?" Walter asked. Emma shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe I saw it somewhere. But when I held your notebook, it kept coming back to me." Walter looked closely. Then he paused. "Wait, this place? I went there. When I was working at the weather station along the border. There was a diner like that. In a little town called Las Piedras. Can we go there?" Walter nodded. "If you drew it, then we had to go." The road to Las Piedras was narrow. And red dust flew up as trucks passed. The town appeared like a small dot in a sun-burned land where everything was faded, the signs. The stucco walls. The old dreams. Emma opened the window, letting the wind blow through her hair. She saw the sign, El Camino Diner, in the distance, just like in the picture. "Grandpa, I see you," Walter said, his voice low and trembling. They stopped by the side of the road. Emma got out first. The wind was hot. The smell of old wood and cornbread wafted through. She pushed open the door of the shop. A bell tinkled. There were only a few people in the shop. A middle-aged woman was wiping the counter. And a man stood behind the stove, long beard. Salt and pepper hair. A sunburnt face. Eyes as deep as a dry well. Emma froze. Not because she was sure it was her father. But because her heart recognized him before her mind. Walter stepped in behind him. His eyes fixed on the man. "Ben." The man paused. The name seemed to pull him up from the water. He turned. His gaze and his voice collided in the silence. "Father?" Emma trembled. She didn't know what to do, hold him, blame him, or just stand there, watching as if she were witnessing a scar that had never healed. The man stepped forward. He knelt down, taking his daughter's hand. "I'm sorry. I thought disappearing was the best way. But every day I make another mistake." Emma burst into tears, but not because of the pain. Because for the first time, she had heard an adult admit his mistake without blaming her. That afternoon, they sat outside the diner, where the wind blew through the old cacti and the radio played old music. Ben told her everything. After being tricked into signing the stock transfer papers, he was threatened with a counter-sue if he dared to resist. Emma's stepmother and her lover had concocted a series of internal accusations, trying to bring him down, quietly, so that he would choose to disappear rather than make a big deal out of it. "I thought, if I were gone, they would leave you alone." Emma shook her head. "They never left me alone. But I had you. And now I have my father." Ben bowed his head. For the first time in years, he cried. Walter looked at them. In the last light of the day, he saw images of himself and his father, sitting like this. One too afraid, and one too unforgiving. That evening, Emma took out her tape recorder and set it on the table. "I have proof of what my stepmother and the other guy said. But I need more. My father's words." Ben nodded. "He's ready." Walter sat down and wrote another page in his diary. "She's not missing. She was pushed out of her world. But her daughter has drawn a path to bring her back." The next morning, before she left town, Emma drew another picture. Her father standing in front of the diner. His hand on her shoulder. Behind him is Mr. Walter, holding a map. All three looking in the same direction. The painting is colorless, but vibrant in its own way. Because for the first time, everyone in the painting is on the same side. Back in town after the trip to Las Piedras, Emma was no longer the little girl who had crouched against her father's shoulder. She stepped out of the car with her back straight, her eyes determined. In her backpack were a fully charged tape recorder. And a new drawing, her father standing in the light. Behind him the shadows of the two people who had once pushed him into the darkness. "I'll go see them," Emma told Walter. "I want to be the one to end this." Walter hesitated. "I'm a minor. Emma, if anything happens, I know what I'm doing. Grandpa, and this time, I'm not afraid of them." Emma walked alone into the Jensen Group building, her father's former home. Neat school uniform, hair tied back, eyes devoid of confusion. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "Are you Ben's daughter?" Emma nodded. "I have a date." She didn't really have a date. But she knew one thing. Those who thought themselves powerful would never refuse an opportunity to flaunt it. The conference room on the 12th floor was icy cold. The black leather chairs, the glass table reflecting the white light. The stepmother sat at the head of the table, wearing a red suit, the lover standing beside her, smiling faintly when he saw Emma enter. "Oh, the brave girl of the year," he said. "So, is anyone with you this time? The old man? Or your crazy dad?" Emma didn't answer. She opened her backpack, took out a small notebook, a pen, and a tape recorder, and hid them under her coat sleeve. The stepmother looked at her with a haughty look, still clinging to fairy tales. "Emma, your father left you, left the past, and if you think you can come back and reclaim what belongs to the family, you're naive." The man laughed, lighting a cigarette. "This girl is just like her father, always thinking she's right, and in the end, she's the one who gets pushed out." Emma sat still. Her hand was under the table, gently pressing the record button. The stepmother continued, her voice full of contempt. "We didn't do anything wrong. Everything was legal. I have his signature. I have a lawyer. I have the board of directors of the company. No one would believe a brat like you. Understand?" The lover leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and said evenly, "And you know what? We did it for you." Because he was weak, soft-hearted for his daughter. A man like that doesn't deserve to keep anything. Emma remained silent. He was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the silence. "Little girl, are you mute?" Emma looked up, a small smile on her face. "I was just waiting for you to finish, so the tape recorder wouldn't interrupt." The air froze for a second. Her stepmother stood up abruptly. What are you doing?" Emma pulled the tape recorder from under her sleeve, placed it on the table, and pressed the play button. The room echoed with their own voices, confessions, laughter, mockery. Each sound was like a knife cutting into the masks they had worn for so long. Her lover stood up, walked quickly toward Emma, and snatched the tape from her. "You little devil!" Slap. The slap landed on Emma's cheek, sending her sprawling to the floor. Her eyes darkened for a moment, but when she looked up, it wasn't the tears that made the man step back. It was a smile, a real smile. Very quiet, very soft, but sure. "Thanks for the slap. Now, in addition to verbal evidence, I can add juvenile battery." She picked up the recorder and stuffed it in her pocket. Then she stood up and brushed off her skirt. "Don't worry, I backed up the file. Grandpa's waiting outside, and a lawyer friend of mine would love to hear it." Emma left the building without looking back. In the parking lot, Walter leaned against the car, watching his niece come out with a flushed cheek and eyes as bright as the sun. "Are you okay?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I'm not hurt, but I think they're starting to get scared." Walter smiled. No further questions. He knew, Emma's greatest battle was not in denouncing, but in standing up to those who had made her bow. That night, Emma sat in her rented room, setting the tape recorder on the table. Ben, her father, listened to the entire recording. When the slap rang out, he closed his eyes. "I defended myself," he said, his voice hoarse. "No," Emma said, "I only did what you couldn't. I don't blame you for disappearing. But I need you to see that I survived." Ben held her. No tears, just silence, as deep as an apology, and as warm as forgiveness. Outside, Walter wrote a single line in his diary. He didn't cry, he smiled, and that smile was the fairest sentence I've ever seen in my life. A few days later, Emma's recording was sent to a law firm that Walter knew well. One that had handled state-level corporate cases. The lawyer listened to the entire 14-minute tape, his face growing paler and paler. If what this girl recorded is true, and it is, then this is more than just corporate fraud. This is embezzlement and intimidation of minors. He put the recorder down on the table. He looked at Walter and Emma. "We'll take care of the rest. Your job, Emma, is to live as someone who has never had a voice." The media got involved. At first, it was just a few small financial news sites reporting suspicions of internal fraud at Jensen Group. But when the clip from the recording went viral, everything changed. The big newspapers reported it. A young journalist went to Emma's house and asked to see her. But she refused to appear. "I don't want to be a character," she told Walter. "I just want to be a normal person again." Walter nodded, then let the adults do the rest. The law office worked tirelessly. They connected with old witnesses, checked financial records, found irregularities in the stock transfer process. And most importantly, the unusual disappearance of Mr. Ben Jensen could now be verified as a forced withdrawal. A summons was issued for Emma's stepmother and her lover. They were suspended from all business activities and placed under surveillance during the investigation. Emma did not need to testify in court. The recording, combined with other documents, was powerful enough to speak for her. One afternoon, Walter was mowing the lawn in the yard when he saw Emma coming home from town. She had a magazine in her hand. The front page was headlined, "Silence is not evidence. The story of a girl who recorded a manipulator." Emma handed him the magazine. Saying nothing, Walter looked at the cover. Then asked, "Have you read it?" Emma shook her head. "No need to read it. Because what you did isn't in it. It's in the nights you didn't sleep. The times you got up after being scared. No one else could have written that." That night, Emma's father, Ben, sat with his daughter in the kitchen. They had dinner for the first time in almost a year. Without awkwardness, without avoidance, Ben put his hand on Emma's sketchbook, looking at the drawings she had never dared to show him. "I wish I could go back and stop it all." Emma smiled. "No need, because if you had come back, I wouldn't have known I was so strong." Ben paused. Then he bowed his head, not out of guilt, but out of pride. A week later, the prosecutor's office held a press conference. The spokesman confirmed that an official investigation was underway into the two defendants, including abuse of position in the company, stock fraud, witness intimidation, and violence against minors. No one doubted anymore. No one said, "She must be making things up." No one asked, "Do you have any proof?" Because now, everyone heard Emma's voice, clear and undeniable. That day, Walter took out his old diary and added a paragraph. It turns out that to be heard, one doesn't need to shout. One just needs someone who believes in the truth and doesn't give up halfway. He closed the notebook, placed it beside his teacup, and looked out onto the porch where Emma sat, holding a piece of unfinished drawing paper. In the twilight, her face was calm, no longer trembling, no longer hiding anything. There was only one girl who had just stepped out of the darkness, with her own voice. That summer, the countryside welcomed Emma back with the first rain of the season. It wasn't a heavy rain, but it was enough to make the young rice fields rustle. The old wooden house hadn't changed much, the porch still rattled when the wind blew. The apple tree in the yard hadn't borne fruit yet, and the old dog Buck still lazily lay in the sun as if nothing had changed in the world. But Emma was different. She stood on the porch, holding a can of white paint, repainting the faded old letters on the wall. Graves House 1971. Walter came out of the house, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to his granddaughter, then stood still, watching the words slowly reappear on the old wooden floor. "Do you want our house to have a new name?" he asked. His voice cheerful. Emma shook her head. "No, I want it back to how it was. But this time, there's no shortage of people." Inside, Ben, Emma's father, was repairing the old bookshelf. Each hammering on the wood was an echo of the past replaced by a new rhythm of life. He had lived with the two of them since his return, not making too much noise, nor trying to make amends with ostentatious gestures. He was just a quiet presence in the right place, at the right time. Every morning, he made coffee for Walter, then took Buck for a walk. Every evening, he sat next to Emma, reading or listening to her tell stories about school. He never said, "I'm sorry," or, "I'll make it up to you." But his every action said it, with wordless persistence. On Emma's 13th birthday, there was no big cake, no balloons, no boisterous greetings, just the 3 of them sitting around the old wooden table. An apple pie that Emma had made for the first time, and a small candle stuck in the crispy, fragrant crust. Walter said, "Make a wish." Emma closed her eyes, was silent for a few seconds, then blew out the candle. "What do you wish for?" Ben asked. She smiled softly. "I wish, next year we're still sitting here. Same 3 people. No one missing. No one missing." Walter hid his smile behind his hot tea. He didn't want anyone to see that his eyes were a little moist. Emma began to write. Not a diary, but snippets of conversations. Short memories. Letters that had never been sent. She sketched out her feelings. Then let the words in. One day, Walter happened to see the manuscript on the table. With a handwritten title, "Grown-ups Don't Hear." He flipped to a page. There are voices that don't need to be shouted. They just need someone to stop and listen. He closed the book, nodding slightly. She's grown up, he thought, and it's learning to tell it, not for revenge, but to remind others not to forget. That afternoon, Emma sat on the porch, drawing the last picture in her notebook. A wooden house with 3 silhouettes sitting side by side. In front of it was a golden field, the wind blowing the grass. In the sky, a bird was flying, not torn by the wind, not tied down. Walter walked up to the porch and sat down next to her. Looking at the picture for a moment, he asked, "Who is that bird?" Emma thought for a moment, then said, "It's me, but it's also my father. And partly you, too." Walter was surprised. "You're a bird? Why?" Emma tilted her head, smiling. "Because you're the one who opened the cage." That evening, the 3 of them sat on the porch, drinking apple juice and looking at the sky. No one said much. They were silent, the comfortable silence between people who had nothing to hide from each other. Walter looked at Emma quietly. She was smiling, the wind blowing her hair across her forehead. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only light. He closed his eyes, and for a brief second he saw his wife. Once, sitting like that, watching her little son run across the yard. Her eyes shining with hope. Now he had brought his granddaughter back to that place. He wrote the last line in his diary. "No childhood is perfect, but if it is pieced together with patience, love, and trust, it can still be a perfect summer." He closed the notebook and put it on the table. Outside, the night air was cool. There was a long chirp of crickets. Emma walked by, holding a cup of hot water. "Would you like some?" Walter smiled. "If it's the tea you like, then probably not, but if it's what I make, then you'll definitely drink it." She put down her cup and rested her head on his shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Walter nodded. "Yes, but sometimes, to get home, you have to get lost." To all the readers who stayed until the end of this story, especially those who are in their 60s, who have experienced many seasons in life and still continue to listen to a new story, I want to thank you not only for reading, but for listening with the heart of someone who understands that silence is also a language. Maybe you have been a grandfather, a grandmother, a father, a mother, who have held the hand of a frightened child without having to say much. Or maybe you have been that child, carrying nameless wounds, but still choosing to love. This story, more than anything, is a word of gratitude for those who did not turn away, did not let go, even when everything seemed too late. Thank you for being here, for letting yourself be moved, and for reminding me that, though time passes, love and courage never age. Team Daily Unexpected Stories.